Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Margot for opening up her home and hosting us. I remember when my parents used to rent for many, many summers on Meadow Lane before this whole place was even, it was just forest over here. And then we watched it like go up because we rented over there for so many years. We went to the shul when it was in a trailer. And then just this whole area has just blossomed and flourished, and it should continue to do so for many years to come. Okay, so we said this morning's Divrei Torah will be for, Margot, would you say the name was? Sophia Bat Rachel and Chaim Ben Shoshana Simcha. So I hope everybody had an enjoyable Shavuot holiday, and we're looking ahead now to the summer months. I think we have one more class on Wednesday, a week from today. And then I think there's going to be a little break. That's by you, Mrs. Leamy. And then we'll take a little break while the kids are out of school and camp and whatever it is. That's mostly for me because I have to be home with the kid. I don't know what everybody else has to do. And then when camp rubs back up again, we'll probably switch the days just because a lot of people had other classes that happen. I know there's so much going on during the summer, so we'll keep you posted on that. Grace will help us out with that as well. So I wanted to start with a question. I want you to imagine a world, or what would a world look like if we never forgot anything? And we have a student. We have a student here who just took a test, right? We have a student here just took a test. Sounds like an amazing world, right? If we never forgot anything, students would all get hundreds on their exams every time they learned something, and people would never forget information, and people would always remember where they put their keys and where their makeup is, and where their phone, they left was. And I know for me, I'll remember to take out the garbage and pay the bills and not forget my wife's anniversary and birthday and everything else. So I think men would benefit from it more than women, personally. Would solve a lot of fights, a lot of back and forth. So it sounds like an amazing thing, right? This idea that we as human beings kind of forget things it seems like a deficiency of human nature that God created us with. And, the more you're able to remember, the greater a person you could become. And so it seems like the idea of forgetfulness is such a negative, and if only we could remember everything, and if only we can have eternal and forever memories. But I saw Julie shaking her head like this. So obviously you have a different take.
I think forgetting things is very important. As simplistically as we wouldn't have more children because we remember the pain of childbirth.
Okay.
But I think more in terms of.
Do you forget the pain of childbirth? Yeah.
Remember it's bad.
Right. Or it hurts. Right. Uh-huh.
Also, in terms of holding grudges and
trauma and losing loved ones.
Right. Right. So Hashem we could maybe say from a different perspective that there is a gift of forgetfulness, right? Because if we weren't able to forget when we were sick and what that felt like, or the pain of childbirth, or the difficult times of a marriage, or if we weren't able to forget certain traumas that happen. I mean, the reason why people suffer from things like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is because some experiences are so difficult for us to let go of. They resonate in our minds and they continue to pop up in the forefront, in the recesses of our memory, that basically what we're trying to help the person do, not to forget, but to be able to process and to be able to heal and to kind of shift their way of thinking. The loss of a loved one, somebody brought up also. I mean, we of course never forget our loved ones. Nobody ever, God forbid, says that we forget about them, but there's this mechanism that's built into the human existence that as time goes on, we're able to cope with things, accept things, shift around our thinking. We don't have that thing in the forefront of our mind the way it was the day that somebody passed away, or the following few days that somebody passed away. Our mind is consumed by it. It's all we can think about. The memories are popping forward and we're having a hard time processing them. And then as time goes on, our minds are able to process it and we're able to get on with our existence while still, of course, maintaining our memory of the person. In addition to that, something so simple as like you get a wedding invitation, right? And your wedding invitation comes, today's June 8th, and all of a sudden I got a wedding invitation for a month from now, July 3rd, July 4th, as a wedding. If I'm able to now take that idea, okay, I'm able to put it sort of in the back of my mind. But if I was always constantly remembering it every second of the day, July 4th, I went, July 4th, I went, we would never be able to move on. You'd never be able to focus on anything else. Your mind would be overloaded and overwhelmed with tasks that you have to do, menial tasks that we have to do on a daily basis. Our mind is able to compute them on autopilot. We don't have to think about them or remember them or whatever, because our mind is geared so that we can shift around our thinking so we could be productive. So there seems to be both a positive and a negative side to forgetting. If you've ever been on the side of forgetting a spouse's birthday, it's terrible, right? And now you have an issue to deal with. But on the other hand, forgetfulness is something that's necessary to the human condition in order for us to be able to function normally in our daily lives. Anybody here make lists? Right? Okay, good, right? That's again another female quality, another thing that men have to learn how to do a little bit better. My wife keeps telling me, make a list, but remind in your phone. I'm like, no, I'll remember. And of course, time and again, we forget all those things. So, writing things down and making a list is something that our minds really, really do benefit from. Because what does it allow us to do? Really, what forgetfulness allows us to do is something very, very deep. It allows us to prioritize information, right? So we forget things that aren't on a certain height of importance for us, and we push things that are much more important to the forefront of our minds. So for me, putting on tefillin is number one. Every morning I wake up, I gotta go and put on my tefillin. If you have a teenager, that's a little bit lower on the list, right? So for me, when teens call me up, Rabbi, I forgot to put on tefillin today. Very hard for me to contemplate such a concept, but put yourself in their shoes. If it's not high on that level of priority there, it's something that could easily be looked over and forgotten about. So forgetfulness is kind of equivalent to how you prioritize. The things that are more important to you in life are things that are going to remain at the forefront of your mind. If we're talking about events or activities or things like that, things that are not as important tend to fall back on the list. And those are typically the things that we will forget. I think that's generalizing it a lot, but I think it's a good starting point for us to understand the concept of forgetfulness and how it plays a role in our lives. Questions or comments just to this far, just the intro. Okay, so I want to read for you a Mishnah in Pirke Abot, which talks about the concept of forgetting our Torah knowledge or forgetting to perform a mitzvah, let's say, for example. And there's very, very severe language brought down here in the Mishnah in Pirke Avot about somebody who forgets even one thing of the Torah that they studied. I'll read to you the Mishnah. A rabbi by the name of Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir said, Kol hashocheach davar echad mi mishnato. Anybody who forgets even one thing from the corpus of their Torah knowledge, something you studied when you were younger, something you learned at a class, and you forget it, the pasuk considers it as the person is liable for their life. That is a very severe quote by the Mishnah. It's basically saying if something bad were to happen to a person, if God forbid a person were to lose their life because they forgot something in Torah, that would be justifiable. You forget one thing that you learned, a person is now vulnerable to attack. Shene'emar, how do we know? Because the pasuk says in Devarim, Rak hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od. Guard yourself and protect your soul greatly. Pen tishkach et hadevarim asher ra'u enecha. Lest you forget these matters which your eyes saw. Does anybody know? Can you think about the context of what Moshe is talking about? He's talking to the Jewish people not to forget something very important event that their eyes saw. Very good. Right? He's talking about Matan Torah. He's telling the Jewish people, never, ever forget, constantly be recollecting the idea that you stood at Har Sinai, you heard the voice of God, you saw this monumental once in a lifetime event, and you received the Torah. That's something you have to constantly be mindful of. Never forget that idea. So therefore, says the Mishnah, he says you have to guard your soul on that matter, meaning that if a person were to forget the giving of the Torah, his soul would be vulnerable. The rabbis equated that to somebody who forgets his Torah. Somebody who forgets the Torah that they studied, even one thing from the Torah that they studied, now leaves themselves susceptible to all different types of dangers that could harm them. Now, that seems to be very severe because God created us with the ability to forget, and we all forget things. Even the greatest of rabbis forget something. If you haven't seen it in a while, if you haven't reviewed it over and over again, we all forget stuff. That's part of being a human being. So how could the Mishnah tell us that we're liable for our lives if we forget even one thing that we studied during the course of our lifetime? It seems almost impossible. Therefore, the Mishnah says, Yachol afilu takfa alav mishnatot. Could it be that the Mishnah is telling us we're liable for our lives, even if it's just so much information? Like sometimes there's so much information to digest that it's impossible for anybody to remember everything. It's just too much, right? Students tell us this all the time. Rabbi, it's too much. I'm just too many units, too many things. Smaller, break it down. Sometimes the Torah is just so vast. It's too much for us to remember everything. Can you be held liable for your life if you're trying your best? You're studying as much as you can. You're reviewing as much as you can, but it's just maybe beyond your capability. Says the Mishnah, that you don't have to worry about. Because the Pasuk says, lest you remove it from your heart all the days of your life. You're not liable unless you actively forget it. You actively cause yourself to forget the Torah that you've studied. So let's unpack what we just read. We read that a person who forgets something from the Torah that they studied is liable for their life. But we recognize that a person who's trying the most that they can, but just doesn't have the capacity to remember everything because it's too vast, that person can't be held liable for their life. Only a person is held liable if they've actively done something to cause themselves to forget. What do you make of this Mishnah? Does it seem too severe? What does it mean to actively forget your Torah that you've studied? How does that even work? What is the takeaway from this Mishnah? Julie, what do you think?
I think maybe more in terms of heresy in saying that this is not what I believe in. Like when you first read it, I said maybe it's not the laws, but it's the premise, what we believe in, its application.
Okay.
And maybe actively forgetting is to negate that.
Okay, so you want to say we're talking here about our major principles, not every single detail, like what do I do if I put the fork in the dairy and I don't remember, I have to call the rabbi again. Maybe we're not talking about that per se as much as we're talking about the major fundamental principles of Judaism, and to actively forget them is to veer off the path and start intentionally. Okay, Gloria, what do you think? You're thinking the other way. Meaning you know the rule, but it doesn't favor you in that situation. So you kind of play mind tricks with yourself that, oh, maybe I'm wrong. I really am allowed to do that and it's okay. And that leads you to something else.
I'm saying something similar to that you know that if you know what's right, then you know what's actually really wrong.
Okay.
So, and if you're going to actually say, I'm not doing this, stupid examples, I'm going to go eat out. I know it's wrong, but I'm doing it anyway. So I know for a fact I'm going against the Torah and what it says to do.
Right.
So somebody who's actively going against it, knowing what they're doing is completely
And so they're quote unquote causing themselves to forget. They're being oblivious, so to speak, to what it is.
That what they're doing, it's okay because I'm eating this, that's
right. Are they rationalizing, you're saying? So they're rationalizing. Okay. I think that could be something that's layered into this Mishnah as well, certainly. Why do you think it's such a harsh punishment, though, for something like this? Let's go back to the idea of forgetting. Forgetting something in Torah means I'm liable for my life. That seems a bit extreme, doesn't it? Yeah? Too extreme for you. Okay. Let's hope it goes somewhere. Good.
So you're saying you're not prioritizing Torah and Hashem.
Right.
So easily.
Exactly. It means a person is not taking enough care to want to remember. It's one thing for a person to forget. They're trying as much as they can. They're studying as much as they can, but Sometimes the material might be too challenging for them. The vastness of what they need to study is too much. And there's a lot out there to study. The Mishnah says you're not held accountable for that. If you're doing what you can to prioritize Torah in your thinking, and just so happens to be you forget things here and there, we're reasonable. We're understanding of that. What it means to actively forget is to be lazy. What it means to actively forget is to be lax in you have the ability to remember. God has endowed you with the capability to study and to learn and to know, but you take the approach of, or somebody takes the approach of, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I'm not going to go try. I'm not going to go learn it. Maybe they're nervous about if I learn it, then that obligates me to go ahead and do it. So I'm going to pretend, like Ms. Levy said, I'm going to be oblivious to what's going on over here. But you have the ability to do it, and you're actively not pursuing it. You're being lax in that endeavor, and that's what's causing the person to forget. If that's where it's coming, that's a lack of prioritization of the Torah. So I'll give you an example. Person goes away on vacation and realizes that, what are they going to do for kosher food? Now they're already there. They're already at the destination. What am I going to do? Oh, can I eat at this restaurant? Can I eat at that restaurant? Call up my rabbi. Can I do this? Can I do that? I'll tell you from the perspective of the rabbi at that point, that's a very painful conversation for us to have. Why? Because what you really want to say to the person is, where were you when you booked this trip? Why didn't you prepare in advance for that, right? That should have been your first thing that you were thinking about when you booked that trip is, what am I going to do for my food? How am I going to eat, right? There are places that I will not travel to because I know in advance I can't get X, Y, and Z that I need in order to maintain what I believe is important. And therefore, I don't even think about those destinations. And I pick from a pool of 5 or 6 other ones that I know I can get something like that. Other people shift their thinking in the other direction. I'll work around what I have to do after I've already done what I want to do for myself. That is what the Mishnah is telling us is actively forgetting. You're causing yourself to forget because you don't want the Torah, you don't want to conform your life to Torah. You want the Torah to conform to you. That's, I think, there's one line to take away, right? Ellen, you like the quotes. There's one line to take away from the class. It's Torah, you should conform to Torah. Torah should not conform to you, right? And so that's the type of thinking that we have to have. How am I living my life in accordance with the laws of the Torah? Not how does the Torah fit in with what I want to do? And when it fits in nicely, fine. And when it doesn't fit in so neatly, I pretend like it doesn't exist. That's actively forgetting. And the Mishnah says, if you're on that page, yeah, that is something that a person can be held liable for in a very severe way, because it means your life is not being led under the values and pretenses of the Torah. It's really more about, I want to do what I want to do. And if I can stick in God where it's convenient for me, I'm happy with that. And if it's not convenient for me, I pretend like it doesn't exist. And that is not an acceptable way for a person, for a Jew, to approach their lifestyle. You're not going to end up infusing into your life or enjoying in your life the benefits of Torah, because Torah is meant to guide us as the first thing that we think about in all of the different situations that we're supposed to go with. On a separate point, when I read this Mishnah with students or with anybody, it's important to review things, right? So right now, students are going through finals, and students hate finals. They really do. It's really, really difficult for them. I used to love finals because, hey, at 12 o'clock, I'm out of school, right? I'm doing whatever I want. But there's a lot of studying going on. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure. But there's a value to review. There's a value to the concept of going back and just looking at how much you learned. How many times has a child of yours come home and say, we don't learn anything in school? And anybody raise your hand and say, we don't learn anything. We don't learn anything. What'd you do today? Nothing. We didn't learn anything. Right. 9 months they sat in the classroom. They didn't learn anything. Right. Believe it or not, it's many times happens. Our students will say, oh, I feel like we didn't learn anything in this class. All of a sudden they'll go out. Let's talk about the final. We did this. We did that. All of a sudden they're like, wow, we really did a lot more than we really thought. Right. It seemed like so little, but all of a sudden they're reviewing and they're going back and saying, wow, we really covered a lot in this class. That is in and of itself already a value, a major satisfaction for students to see what they covered from the start of the year till the end of the year. but it's also important to infuse in them the value of reviewing their studies, of going over it. Because why is review so important? Not just to remember, but why is reviewing Torah specifically for a moment so important? How many people have reviewed a story that you've learned a few times in your life?
Because it takes a long enough time to change whatever habits you have now to be able to take it in, learn the lesson, and then put it out. What you learned.
What do you mean? I'm not so sure.
Meaning you can learn emunah for years.
I understand.
Like there's certain, like certain things that you need, and it can help you grow and continue your growth.
Right. So some things you want to review because
it will help you to grow.
At each stage of your development as a person, there's a different thing that you could take away from that particular thing that you're studying. Yeah.
So my great grandmother was at she passed away at 109.
Wow.
Going to shul in her walker, so really the end, whatever. And I would ask her and say to her, like, every week you go to shul and it's the same parashas for all these years. Like,
Right.
what's, what are they telling you that you don't already know? And she would say that every time you go, like a different point comes to you. Like,
Absolutely.
Like touches your week, so it was really
100%.
exceptional to see that.
Yeah, that's a great lesson because, and that's something that we can learn from our elders, right? That when young people see them coming back again and again, it shows them the fact that Torah, you're always
There was
learning.
nothing for her to always hear.
100%. And it's because we're always changing, right? So think about a story that you read. Think about the following. You read the story of Abraham finding a wife for Yitzchak. You read that story when you're 21 years old, single, looking for your spouse. There's one way that you're going to look at that story, right? You're viewing it from the lens of a single person who's looking for their spouse, who wants to get married. What am I looking for? That's how you're going to look at that story. 20 years later, when you're 41 years old or 42 years old, and you're Avraham in the story, you're not Yitzchak anymore in the story, right? When you read the story when you were 21, you were Yitzchak looking for that wife, or you were Rivka who's getting set up with somebody. Now, when you look at the story 20 years later, you don't look at it anymore from Yitzchak because you're not Yitzchak anymore. Who are you in the story now? Now you're Avraham, who's searching for your child to be able to get married. And now you're thinking about what was Avraham going through? And now you're relating to Avraham the second time you read that story. And then the third time you read that story, you're in a completely different mode. As you progress through life, you're going to see different stories and different experiences and different laws in the Torah from a completely different perspective and a different lens because you're changing as a person, because you're in different experiences as you're learning Torah. So when you're reviewing, and this is why we read the parasha over and over and over, and we study it over and over, because there's always something new to learn. There's always another angle to view it from. There's always a different character, or a different perspective that you could take based on what you're experiencing in your life. So as you're going through life, the Torah is going through life with you. That's a living and breathing Torah. So I think so far what we've said is we've talked a little bit about forgetfulness and why forgetfulness is either a positive or a negative. We've talked about how it helps us to function on a daily basis and how it's something that teaches us what's important in life. If we forget something, it means it wasn't important enough for us to remember. Torah has to be important enough for us to remember, and it has to be important enough for us to fit ourselves into the Torah and not the Torah into us. And how important is it to review so that we're constantly bringing up new things for us to be able to understand and know and have the Torah guide us in all these different situations. I want to mention for you a couple of rabbinic statements that are very interesting about the concept of review and learning things over and over again. One of these statements will be a bit shocking for some. I hope that nobody takes it the wrong way, but hopefully we'll try to explain what it really means. One of these will be particularly sensitive for women. I thought about should I say it, not say it? I said, I'll go with it anyway, so you'll see. He says the following: a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Korha said, anyone who learns Torah but doesn't review the Torah that they learned, it's like they planted but didn't reap. You planted something, but you didn't harvest it for yourself. Because when you study something the first time, you planted a seed in you, but then you really didn't develop it. You didn't grow it. You didn't think about it again. You didn't review it and say, well, wait a minute, what about this perspective? What about that perspective? The Yoshua said, anybody who learns Torah and forgets it, It's like a woman who gives birth and then buries the child. That was the one that I knew would maybe strike a chord, especially with a group of women. That's a very, very rough one, right? But what was Rabbi Yoshua trying to express over here? As women, you produce a child, you've grown the child inside of you, you've nurtured that child, and then you go through the birth pain that Julie's, and you do all of this to produce the child, and then you don't cultivate the child further than that. You don't get the opportunity to see what that's going to become later on. You study something in Torah and then you forget about it. You don't have the ability to produce what it's going to give for you later on in life. It's basically like you did all of this work to get something and then you didn't reap the benefits of it. You didn't get to see where it was going to go because you stopped it dead in its tracks by not letting it continue to flourish, by not going back to it, by not reviewing it. Provocative language, but it's language you'll always remember, right? That's one of the things that the rabbis want to do for us. An interesting, yeah, yes.
So are you better, like, if you're not, certain things, I mean, everyone's on their level, but like, so you better off not learning?
No, see, that's not right. So I would not say, oh, I shouldn't learn so that I don't forget. No, because that's what we go back to the idea. Oh, doing certain things. Yeah. So I think it's very important. Yeah. So it's not, I don't think it's acceptable. It's clearly that there's many sources for this, that it's not okay to say, I'm not going to go and learn because I don't feel that I'm capable of implementing what I'm going to learn, right? So I'm just going to pretend like I don't know it so that I could just go, right? That's not acceptable in the eyes of the Torah. It's also not acceptable to learn something and say, well, that's not for me, right? That's not me, and I just push it aside. There has to be something more in the middle. A person has to tell themselves, I need to learn because I want to know, because it's important for me to know. But I go in with the understanding that maybe I'm not at the level to implement every single thing in my life. Everything the rabbi says, any idea, I'm going to have to think about each thing on the level that I'm currently at and figure out how I can grow to eventually reach where I'm going to go at the end of the day, right? So when a person hears something that maybe they're not ready to accept, right, at that moment, it's not something that they were brought up with, it's not something that's fitting in the culture around them. And so they say to themselves, you could say to yourself two things. That's nonsense, I'm out, right? Which is, I think, not the right approach. You could say on the opposite extreme, I'm not just going to even go and know it because better that I shouldn't know. I think both of those are two extremes. I think you say, I want to know, it's important to know what the right thing is. And then I have to figure out how can I devise a plan for myself to at least strive towards getting there. I may get there, I may not. But if I believe that it's a value, if it is important, and if it's really true that that's what the Torah wants from a person, then I should be taking steps towards reaching that goal. And maybe I get there, maybe I don't. But as long as I'm growing as a person, that's, I think, the key. Having a growth mentality is the most important part of being of the learning process. That you're willing to be open-minded to the concept of growth and you're taking things on to grow in small increments, I think is the most important thing. And then maybe you reach that pinnacle goal, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think after 120, when you go to Shamayim, Hashem will not say to you, but you never got there. You said, but I tried. At least I was making an effort. I didn't reject it. I tried. I put it as a goal. Maybe I did and maybe I didn't reach it. And I have to be honest with myself if I'm doing the things that I need to do to be able to get there, right? But you can't outright deny it, and you can't become oblivious to it and turn the blind eye to it, because then that basically closes the door from ever becoming anybody who's going to grow into something. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So you're gonna have to use that word again. Like, I'm there, but I'm not there yet. Or I'm,
Right.
going up that
Yeah.
way.
As long as a person is growth. But the question is it being honest? But is it being honest? So you have to be honest with the person. So if you're not being honest, then it's a separate story.
I don't think it's for me. I don't think it's for me. I'm just being
Yeah, but I
honest.
think yeah is a great word.
Yeah,
You're not letting it go completely.
Whatever it is. I don't know.
Right.
I'm saying it's on a general purpose. I don't want to, it's.
You're right.
Sometimes something is like, you get nervous, you know it's coming.
Saying one thing is saying it's not for me, and the other saying, oh, but I'm not there yet, but I know I'm not getting there. Like, I know that's a
But why tell yourself that? But why tell yourself that? See, that's your Yetzer Hara getting the better of you, because your Yetzer Hara is going to creep into you and to tell you, well, I'm never going to get there. But you don't know where you're ever going to get to. Why? As long as a person is on a path of growth and you're constantly evaluating yourself, you're always reflecting on who you are as a person. You're always saying to yourself, am I doing the right thing right now? Can I be doing more? Can't I be doing more? What are some of my challenges? Is my family an issue? Is my community an issue? Are my friends an issue? Whatever the roadblocks are, you just have to be honest about what those roadblocks are and say to yourself, am I doing the most that I can? If I believe that this is truly a value. If I don't believe that it's a value and I don't believe that it's a goal, then we have a separate discussion, right? Then we have a separate conversation in which there's a debate here between maybe what the rabbi says and what we think as to what our values are. But if we all believe that it's a value, if we all believe that a certain level of kashrut observance is a value, and Shabbat observance is a value, and modesty observance is a value, and whatever other things that we're looking at, or charity. Think about charity. Let's talk about money, how much a person wants to give, and what they want to do, and how much time they can give to an organization. So sometimes a person says, I'd really love to be a full-time volunteer in X organization. But right now I'm looking at my schedule and I have this many kids and I have this many grandkids and I have a son who needs to get married, I can't give all my time and I can't give a full day to this organization. But does that mean that I should just say, well, okay, that's it, I'm out. I'm out? No. Person could say to themselves, I can give part-time, I can give a little bit. And every 6 months or so, I reevaluate. Am I at a different place? Can I give a little bit more? Can I do a little bit more of this? Am I growing in this endeavor? And that's what a person should be thinking about. That's why I said that's them putting in it as, oh, I'm never going to get there. So he convinces you, and really it's you convincing yourself, because maybe you don't really want it at this moment right now. Maybe you're not 100% convinced of it. That's really the issue. But if a person says, I want to learn because I want to know, not everything that I'm going to be able to implement right now at this moment is going to be it. Because if it was, then we'd all be, everybody has it on their level, right? Everybody has it on their level. So in my household, I don't keep Chalav Yisrael, but my wife and I, we talk about it all the time. Should we, shouldn't we? But they like these yogurts and they don't like those yogurts and the taste isn't so great. And I have my family over and blah, blah. And we talk about it. And sometimes I've done it by myself and my wife will do it differently. So but as long as it's a conversation, as long as we believe that it's important, we have a discussion about it.
You're not negating that that's not a rule. This is not where I am, but it's still a rule.
And it has, again, it's saying, the particular example that I'm bringing there is, we're talking about something that's a stringency that ideally speaking, a person should keep, but it's not as if I'm violating the law if I'm not keeping it. I have what to rely on if I'm not, but it's typically a value of a lot of people. So we talk about it and we do it. Each example has to be looked at in a certain way and have to examine every case individually. But saying I'm not going to learn because I'm nervous about what it's going to obligate me or throwing things out, to me, is going on opposite extremes. It's not taking a balanced approach, and it stunts growth. A person should always be in a growth mentality.
So, let's say you're learning something that's way above your level, and it's maybe like a similar to eating out, whatever, and they know it's wrong more so, and they still do it. Isn't that the same freedom?
So there is a concept that is mentioned in halakha that when a person is doing something accidentally versus when someone is doing something intentionally, then obviously it greatens the act that the person is doing. It heightens the act, no question. We as rabbis, by the way, have to often be mindful of that. Sometimes if we know that somebody is doing something and that if we told, and they think they're under the impression that it's not a problem, and we know that if we told them that it's a problem, they wouldn't stop doing it, and now that would escalate them to the level of intentionality. Sometimes we hold back on telling the person that particular thing because we know that they're not ready or capable of hearing it, right? So the rabbis have a very nice statement. They say, just like it's a mitzvah to tell somebody something that they will hear, it's also a mitzvah to not tell them something that they won't hear, right? So sometimes, what? Know your customer. So sometimes you have to hold back, and that's the challenge of the teacher, is to sometimes understand where are my students at, what level are they talking about, and, and work with that.
yourself a rabbi, not just.
Correct.
accept
It's a responsibility on both ends, for sure. It's a responsibility on both ends from the teacher's perspective to know their students, and the students to choose a teacher that's in line with their values and how they're gonna educate them. But I think a lot of times people know things are not right, and it's still important for them to get educated on it, because in my opinion, the only way people can grow is with education. You're not going to grow from people forcing you to do it. You're not going to grow from people telling you all of the evil punishments that are going to befall you. At a certain stage of life, I can sit here and tell you, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and this is bad, and that's bad. But that's not the way a person wants to observe Torah and mitzvot. I'm doing it because I'm feared that God's going to throw lightning bolts at me, and this is going to harm me, and that's going to this me. That's not going to make for a positive outlook towards Torah. It's all about education. It's all about knowing why something is important, why it's a good deed to do, how it's going to benefit me in my life. And the more a person studies it, the more they hear it, the more, the first time you hear something, the ear doesn't take it so well, right? And then you have to hear it a second time, and then you're like, it sounds a little better. Then a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, and you hear from a friend, and you hear this, like, okay, maybe there's something to this. It takes time for a person to open up and to be receptive. The heart of a person is often like a rock. There's water that the Torah is like hitting it, and it has to erode it to kind of crack open the shell a little bit before it's able to get in. And that's why you have to keep hearing things in a soft and conscious way. I wanted to mention a couple of other interesting things about the concept of forgetfulness. The rabbi is saying in the Gemara in Berachot, they say you have to be very careful about the honor of people who forget things. What does he mean by that? He says sometimes you can have a Torah scholar, the person becomes very elderly and they start to forget things, right? And it's very easy to start being dismissive of them, to look at them in a dishonorable way because of their age. The Gemara says, Hizaharu, be very careful, bezaken sheshachach, of an elderly person who's forgetting things, right? Because why is he forgetting? It's not to his fault. That's just part of the human condition of aging, and they're doing everything they can. And they bring a very nice parable. They say, in the Ark of the Covenant, in the golden house, where what's put inside of there? What's inside of that Ark of the Covenant? The luchot, but which ones? There's the whole ones and there's the broken ones, say the rabbis. Why would Hashem require Moshe to take the broken tablets and put them in the Aron? That's it, they're broken. It was to symbolize this idea that sometimes Torah can break apart, but we still give it honor from where it came from. So even if a person is starting to forget things, even if the human condition is such that nothing they can do about it, they're starting to become forgetful, still have to give them the proper honor and respect that they've earned during the course of their lifetime as studying. I want to close with one idea that I've already mentioned, but I want to sort of crystallize it here. There's one very, very interesting midrash that talks about three very important mitzvot, one of which many here sitting around the table do, I know for a fact, two of which are not really applicable so much to us today. So don't be nervous, right? We don't do them not because we don't want to do them, but because they don't really come to our hand, but we're going to internalize all three together. And the rabbis have a fantastic saying, a kind of perplexing saying, we have to understand it. Says Rav Matana the following, Bizchut shlosha devarim nivra ha'olam. For three things, in the merit of three mitzvot, the whole world was created. Pause there. Did I mention this one to us before? We did?
I think you're very first by Iris.
Really? Okay, so then I'm going back to it again. I had a feeling that maybe I did mention it. So let's see if we reviewed it or let's see if we forgot it. Let's see if we forgot it. If I told you pick three mitzvot in the Torah that the whole world would be created for, what would come to your mind? Okay, so charity, Torah study, tefillah maybe, good. Anything else? Shabbat, no? Okay, interesting. Usually Shabbat is a big one. And it's Israel maybe. So here's the three that the Midrash brings. Look at the three that the Midrash brings. The Midrash says, separating challah, the dough. Hafrashat challah, separating the dough. Not nerot. That was a different three. No, that's good. That's a different three. That's nerot and midah and challah. Also there, challah is there as well. Challah is one. separating your tithes, ma'asrot, that a person has to separate their 10%. For us today, we do it more like charity. In those days, they used to separate from their grain 10% or so, and they used to give it away to the Kohanim and the Leviim and others. So your chala, you separate, you give it to the Kohen. Your 10%, you separate, you give it to the Kohen. And the last one is bikurim. Anybody know what bikurim are? The first fruits that you bring. Okay, so 3 mitzvot, your charitable 10% that you give, your challah that you separate from the dough, and your bikurim, your first fruits that you bring to the Beit HaMikdash. Where do the rabbis know that the world was created for all of these? So I won't bore you with the technicality, but very simply, the first word of the Torah is Bereshit. These 3 mitzvot are all called Reshit, the first of something. What they all share, the common denominator is, before you can enjoy from your bread, you have to separate a piece for Hashem. Before you can enjoy from your produce, you have to separate 10% to give to the Kohanim, Hashem's servants. Before you can enjoy your fruits of the tree, you have to take a portion of them, bring them to the temple, and acknowledge Hashem. So before you do anything for yourself, you have to separate a portion, and you have to designate them to Hashem. So now, it seems a little strange. These are the 3 mitzvot that the whole world was created for. What about all these other ones that most of us usually prop up, studying Torah and keeping Shabbat and laws of keeping kosher? These are and family purity. What about all those? These are very, very important things. What happened to those ones? What's the takeaway of this midrash? What is this midrash trying to tell us?
That you have to have gratitude and show your gratitude towards God and say that everything came from Him, and then it's nothing you did. It became.
So you got to start with acknowledgement of God, and nothing that came to you is from your
hard work.
right. You put in what you needed to do, but if not for Hashem, you wouldn't have gotten it. So you have to have that acknowledgement. Excellent. Anything else? And say it even a little bit more. Doing Hashem with everything in mind, but not only that, what? You could still have yourself in mind a little bit, right? You're still earning your living. Okay, a little bit more. Kind to your fellow man. So we're also providing for other people, the charitable contributions, the Kohanim, who are the servants of Hashem. Doesn't belong to you. Huh? The dough, the 10%, and the bikurim. It's all about separating from yours. But notice how all of these things are all the first. They're all the first. Exactly, the Pidyon Ben, that's what I think it was. They're all the first, right? And we talked about the first being important. You have to review it. Even I have to review it. I forgot what it is. That's why we're coming back to it. It's the idea that it's your first, right? And what it's telling us is that anytime we do something in life, our first thoughts, our first thing has to be, what am I responsible for towards Hashem? What is my obligation in this scenario towards God? I'm starting a business, right? And most of us would start thinking about, okay, what's my product? What's my marketing strategy? Where am I going to do it? How am I going to make money? What should my price point be? You figure out all of those details, right? But the first thing you have to start and ask yourself is, what's my responsibility to Hashem? How am I going to make my business about Hashem? Asking yourself, why am I starting a business? Why am I earning my money? How am I focused on Hashem within my business? How does that affect how I'm treating my employees? How does that affect how I'm treating my customers? How does that affect my price point, right? Making sure that I have a fair and honest price point for my product. I'm not taking advantage of my customers. I'm not overcharging them. I'm not taking advantage of my employees, right? When a person is starting their business, it's very easy for us to focus all of the attention on me, how I'm going to make my money, how I'm going to make sure that my business is successful, instead of first starting with, how is my business going to help other people? How is my business going to help be connected to Hashem? How is it going to help employees? How is it going to help my customers? What am I going to provide for people? If you could shift your thinking away from what is this going to do for me first and foremost, to what is this going to do for others? How is this going to impact people outwardly? It's a whole different way of looking at the world. And that's what the Torah demands of us. The whole world was created for these 3 mitzvot, because these 3 mitzvot teach us how to think about the world. They teach us how to think with God on our mind first and foremost, and other people on my mind first and foremost. Frida, you mentioned paying forward to others, that when you When you think about what would I do if I win the lottery, it's not what would I spend, it's what would I give, right? What would I provide for others? Or I wouldn't tell. Okay, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad. I'm not sure if that fits with what we're talking about here, but we'll go with it, right? But the idea being is that, okay, I made my money. Not what am I going to buy with my money for myself? What am I going to give with my money for other people, right? How am I going to provide something for somebody else? So I think everything here, all that we start, if we double back to the beginning, the whole concept of forgetfulness and prioritization and remembering and reviewing is all about putting God at the forefront of everything we do. And that our minds should be thinking first and foremost, anytime we do something, whether it's, like I said, starting a business, or what school am I going to put my kids in, or what am I doing for the summer, or how is my schedule going to look like when I'm off while my kids are in camp. I'm making a wedding, I'm making a brit milah, I'm having a function, right? What is my function going to be towards God, right? In other words, when a person's making a wedding, they got a whole list of things that they're going to do, but where are they prioritizing those things in the concept of, this is a holy marriage, this is something my daughter or my son is coming together to build a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael. This is going to be a day that roots them in holiness and sanctity and propels them towards their greater goal of building a house connected to Hashem. I want to make sure that every aspect of my wedding is with Hashem in mind, so that I infuse that into my children who are getting married and where they're going to go later on in life. It's a whole different way of thinking about things, a very lofty way of thinking. It's a very challenging way of thinking, because as human beings, we're naturally putting ourselves at the center. But if we use this as our guideline, right? If we use this as our light, we understand that everything we do in life has to be first and foremost with Hashem in mind, with other people in mind, thinking about how we're doing things outward. And then afterwards, you'll find that so much comes back to the person inward as well. And so that's where our prioritization comes in, prioritizing Torah, organizing our things and our thoughts so that we make sure that our first and foremost is Hashem and other people. And then we see how it works, how it boomerangs back to us as well. Questions, thoughts, comments, ideas? Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great day.